Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are digging into a day that, honestly, changed everything. September 11th, 2001. We're going to look at what happened that morning, who was behind the attacks, and maybe most importantly, why we're still feeling its effects in so many parts of our lives today.
So let's just set the scene. On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 terrorists from al-Qaeda hijacked 4 commercial planes. And as you can see from this timeline, it all started at 8:46 a.m. when the first plane hit the World Trade Center. The craziest part? This all unfolded live on television for the entire world to watch in real time.
Think about this for a second. The entire thing, all of it, went down in just 102 minutes. I mean, from the first plane hitting the tower to the final crash, just over an hour and a half. It's no wonder the entire country, really the whole world, was just left in absolute shock. It was one of those moments that just completely changes your sense of what's possible.
Okay, so this wasn't just some random act. No, there was a really deliberate and frankly horrifying strategy here. You look at the flights they chose. They were all long-haul, cross-country flights. Why? Because they were packed to the brim with jet fuel, literally tens of thousands of gallons. The planes were the weapons. You see it here. 2 from Boston hit the World Trade Center towers. 1 from Dulles, right outside D.C., hit the Pentagon. And that 4th one, from Newark, well, that's the one that crashed in a field in Pennsylvania because the passengers heroically fought back. Now, a lot of people think the towers fell just because the planes hit them, but it's a little more complex than that. The real killer was the fire. All that jet fuel ignited these massive infernos, and the heat got so intense it started to weaken the building's steel skeleton, its core supports. When that steel started to warp and buckle, the floors above just pancaked down, one on top of the other. It was a complete catastrophic failure. The South Tower went first, even though it was hit second.
And the human cost. I mean, the numbers are just hard to wrap your head around. 2,977 people were killed. To this day, it is the single deadliest terrorist attack in world history. And it's so important to remember, this wasn't just an attack on America. The victims came from over 90 different countries. It was a truly global tragedy.
And then there's the first responders. Their sacrifice was just immense. For firefighters and for police officers, September 11th was the single deadliest day in American history, period. We're talking 343 firefighters, 72 police officers, plus 55 military members at the Pentagon who lost their lives. These were the people running into the chaos, while everyone else was trying to get away.
So, that brings us to the big question, right? Who did this, and why? To really get the full picture of 9/11, you have to understand who the perpetrators were and what on earth could possibly motivate an act like this.
The group behind it all was al-Qaeda. You've probably heard the name. It's an Islamist militant group, and at the time it was led by Osama bin Laden. Now, he wasn't some unknown figure in 2001. No, U.S. intelligence had been tracking him for years. In fact, way back in 1996, he issued what's called a fatwa, which is basically a religious ruling, and it was pretty much a declaration of war on the United States.
So, in their own words, through different videos and statements, bin Laden and his top guys laid out their reasons, their supposed justifications. A big one was the presence of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia, which is a huge deal because that's the home of Islam's holiest sites. They also pointed to America's strong support for Israel and the tough economic sanctions that were placed on Iraq at the time.
For years, bin Laden was kind of coy about it, denying direct responsibility. But then, right before the 2004 U.S. election, he released a videotape and just admitted it, point blank. And he said the idea actually came to him way back during the 1982 Lebanon War. He saw towers being destroyed there and thought we should do the same to them. His goal, he said, was chillingly simple. He wanted Americans to taste some of what we tasted.
Okay, so with all this chaos unfolding, how did the U.S. government even begin to respond? I mean, the speed and the sheer scale of the attacks caused so much confusion. They had to make some absolutely unprecedented decisions, and they had to make them fast.
Get this. Less than an hour after the first plane hit, the FAA made a call that had never been made before. At 9:42 a.m., they ordered every single civilian plane in U.S. airspace, thousands of them, to land at the nearest airport, immediately. It was the first time in history that it ever happened. All international flights headed for the U.S. were diverted. Canada actually took in over 200 of them in something they called Operation Yellow Ribbon. For 3 straight days, the skies over America were eerily empty.
The attacks basically set off a massive overhaul of the U.S. government, probably the biggest in decades. And the goal was simple: make sure this never, ever happens again. This is where a lot of things we're familiar with now came from. The Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, was created. The TSA was formed to take over airport security. And then there was the USA Patriot Act, a really controversial law that gave the government a whole lot more power to conduct surveillance, even on its own citizens.
And it didn't take long for the military response to get authorized. Just 3 days after the attacks, Congress passed something called the Authorization for Use of Military Force. You might hear it called the AUMF. This document essentially became the legal green light for the entire war on terror. It gave the president really broad powers to go after anyone involved in the attacks. And that led directly to the invasion of Afghanistan just a month later, in October 2001, to go after al-Qaeda and the Taliban who were protecting them.
All right, so let's fast forward. It's been over 2 decades. Why are we still talking about this? Well, the simple reason is that the legacy of 9/11 is still shaping our world in really profound ways. From the way you get on a plane to the long, long shadow of the wars that started right after.
And you can really see that lasting impact in a few key areas. I want to focus on 3. How we travel, a kind of hidden health crisis that's still going on, and the mind-blowing financial costs of the response to these attacks.
I mean, this right here is probably the most visible change for almost everybody. If you're old enough to remember, think about what airports were like before 9/11. Security was pretty lax. You could walk your friends or family right up to the gate to see them off. After 9/11, that world vanished. Air travel was completely transformed. We got the TSA, screening for every single passenger, reinforced cockpit doors. Basically, the whole airport security experience we're so used to today was born out of that one day.
But the impact didn't just stop when the dust settled. Far from it. When those towers came down, they released this massive cloud of toxic dust and debris all over Lower Manhattan. And in the years since, we've seen a heartbreaking health crisis emerge. Thousands of people, residents, workers, first responders, have developed terrible illnesses from that exposure. And here's the most tragic part of that legacy. More first responders have now died from 9/11-related illnesses than the 343 who were killed on that day.
And what about the financial cost? Well, it's just staggering. The Cost of War project over at Brown University did the math. When you add up the post-9/11 wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, plus all the spending on homeland security, the price tag comes out to an estimated $8 trillion. That's a number so big it's hard to even imagine, and it absolutely continues to affect the national debt and what our government spends money on today.
So all of this leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. That one morning kicked off wars overseas and a whole new security system here at home, and the ripple effects are still spreading out. The big wars may have wound down, but so many of the laws, the surveillance, the technologies that were part of that war on terror, they're still here. They're still part of our lives. So it really makes you wonder, right? Did that era ever really end? Or did it just evolve into a permanent feature of the world we now live in?